Suez Canal, the Egyptians nationalized it. But the Suez Canal remains open, and the difficulty was overcome after the Egyptians, I don't think they closed it for, even after the French and the British attacked them. Once peace was restored, Suez Canal is open for passage.
Do you think today's conflicts, isolated crises, are a part of a larger regional competition?
I'm not so sure that it is part of a larger regional competition. It is a question of security in my mind.
Welcome to The Final Mandate, yet another episode on the Middle East strategic order and contemporary geopolitical tensions. Today we are joined by R. Kannan, writer, commentator, and former United Nations officer who has worked in peacekeeping missions across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Welcome, Mr. Kannan.
Thank you, and it's good to see you again, Mahendra.
Thank you. Same here. As we are stepping into the third week of the Middle East crisis, what do you think is going to happen or happening?
I think this war will come to an end in the next few weeks maximum. I don't think anyone has the wherewithal or the strength to continue this war turn it into a prolonged war. My feeling is Trump is looking for a way out. The Iranians are probably also looking for a way out, despite the bravado, despite the tall talk. The Israelis say very little, you might have noticed. They are into assassinations. So a day before, they had finished off Ali Larijani, the head of the Security Council, who was considered a pragmatist, although a hawk, and who is considered responsible for the brutal suppression of the revolts and the protests that happened early this year. Also, they've killed the head of the Basij. The Basij is a paramilitary force, numbering into the hundreds of thousands, and it's an arm of the brutal repression machine. They've killed them. It's an extremely complicated picture today as we enter the third week, because the Americans have taken 13 fatalities. The Iranians have more than probably 1,400 fatalities, 168 of them being children. We don't know what else is happening elsewhere. In the Gulf, a number of collateral fatalities have happened. The economy has been greatly shaken. Prices of gas has been up. From the 60s, it's crossed more than 100. So there's a lot of pressure on Trump to leave. And he's been sending mixed messages. At one point, he says the war will end pretty closely. At another point, he says we are not yet done with them. So they've hit about 7,000 targets so far, the Americans. Each day, the war is costing $1 billion. That's 9,200 crore rupees. So the first 3 days cost the Americans almost 30,000 crore rupees. So this war is a very, very, very costly war. And you can also see the number of missile and projectile attacks by the Iranians into the Gulf has slowed down, which means two things. One is probably their stockpile is being reduced. We can say the same thing about the Israelis and then the Americans. The second is probably they are saving whatever is left for a more serious fight. Because if you look at the 12-day war of the past year, they didn't react that much. In fact, that might have sent some wrong signals to the American intelligence community and in the military community. Because what Trump has said is, the only place where he expressed surprise is, he said, I'm surprised that they went after the Gulf states. That is the only place which he was surprised. Otherwise, he says another regime that takes over could be as equally anti-American or inimical to American interests as the last one. So there are people, his head of the counter-terrorism unit resigned a day before, saying that he lost his wife in Syria. And this is a 11 times combat veteran. He has been into so many missions. So he has all the authority to speak. He may not be the most senior official, but he's a high-ranking official. And he has resigned, saying that the Israelis have actually handheld him and have walked him into this war, which is not our war, according to him. And many innocent lives have been lost before, and they are likely to be lost again, not to mention the 13 who have already given their lives.
When we step back from individual crisis and look at the region strategically, how should we understand the current balance of power in the Middle East today?
It's the current balance of power has gone through a bit of a change in the last few decades. In the post-Second World War era, the Americans underwrote the security of the Gulf, especially the Saudis. So they preferred stability to democracy. So they tolerated. In fact, there was one report that I read which says there's been more than 60 attempts by the CIA to bring down elected governments. And 2/3 of those was to bring back or in defense of an authoritarian government. So the Americans have, being one of the two superpowers in the post-Cold Second World War era, underwrote the security for the Saudis and the rest. In the last 20, 30 years, most of these Gulf states have become a bit more aware of their natural resources. Now, Saudi Arabia is a rentier state. Now, what is a rentier state? A rentier state is something that sells its natural resources and takes money. These natural resources will, at some point, be finished. The Saudis are very aware of this. They're aware that in about 50 years or so, they'll run out of oil. If you look at the Iranians estimate that they will have oil reserves which will last for about 100 years at this rate of pumping out oil and selling them. The rest of the Gulf, where there is oil, it could last for about maybe 60 years or a little more. So most of these countries, in addition, firstly, they're after the aftermath of the oil era. So Saudis are industrializing like nobody's business. They are inward looking. The sovereign wealth fund that the three countries essentially funnel, the Qataris, the Emiratis, and the Saudis, comes to about $4 trillion. That is India's GDP. Okay. The Qataris buy sport clubs. They host sport events. They showcase their diplomacy. They're a very, very tiny nation. They're probably less than 500,000 Qataris on earth. But they have, in the last 20, 30 years, punched above their weight because they have been very hospitable to militant groups like Hamas, like the Taliban, like the Islamic Brotherhood, and you name it, all these resistance movements. Until the emergence of the Qataris, the Saudis were the undisputed leader of the Sunni Islamic world. So going back to your question as to the arrangement, the power balance, the Saudis were looked upon as the eldest sister or the eldest brother by smaller countries like Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, etc. Then you had a competitor there. That competitor was the United Arab Emirates. The Emiratis are very, very good with infrastructure. If the public investment fund that the Saudis have, which is part of the sovereign wealth fund, invests in infrastructure and creating the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, it's the alternate to, it's a challenge to the United Arab Emirates' infrastructural prowess, because the Emiratis control 80 terminals in 40 different countries. The DP World, the head of the DP World resigned because he was implicated. His name showed up in the Epstein files recently. The Emiratis have turned Dubai into a transportation aviation hub. They've turned Abu Dhabi into a strategic capital base. They've turned the whole of Emirates, which is also, again, a very small place with few Emiratis and mostly expats, into a very thriving place for tourism, for capital investments, they are into space technology and so on. And they are taking a role, playing a very decisive role, challenging the Saudi supremacy in places like Sudan, in places like Yemen, where the Saudis have a client, where the Emiratis have another client. So this monopoly or the hegemony that the Saudis once enjoyed is being shaken, so much so. Now we'll have to go to the Qataris. The Qataris, what do they showcase? They have a broadcasting station called Al Jazeera. That gives them a lot of exposure, it gives them a lot of muscle. They're a very, very small country, and then they have so much shale gas. So they have gotten into contracts with their clients, countries that buy natural gas from them, LNG, and they lock them into contracts for 10, 15 years so that there is a sense of certainty and stability in this relationship. And they host sport events. They not only they mediate, they are good in mediation, they are big in mediation. So much so in 2017, the Saudis and the Qataris were at loggerheads. The Emiratis joined the Saudis, the Bahrainis joined the Saudis, and there was an economic blockade where the land borders of Qatar were sealed by a few Gulf countries. Oman and Kuwait were the exceptions, and it was through Kuwaiti mediation that after 3.5 years, and finally after President Trump pushed for it, they reconciled. And what was the beef? The beef was that they were supporting the Islamic Brotherhood. Now, who are the Islamic Brotherhood? The Islamic Brotherhood are a political group which believes in an ideology, it's a fundamentalist ideology, an Islamic state based on Islamic precepts. Now, the current administration in Egypt views them with disfavor. Their chief was sentenced, the Islamic Brotherhood is banned, and if the Qataris were to support the Islamic Brotherhood, that is not in anybody's interests, according to the Saudis, because these movements, as radical as they are a huge threat to any monarchy. What baffles me is, why would the Qataris, who are also a monarchy, a royal family, support or, work with such groups? I can understand them working with the Taliban. It's far away. Egypt is a big country. So if you're going to host the Islamic Brotherhood, you're upsetting both the Egyptians. The Egyptians were upset, and then they also imposed a blockade. And the Qataris found different routes and alternate routes. Their economy suffered because of this. This is the dynamics in the Gulf world. There are three major powers. The most singular, significant power are the Saudis. The UAE comes next to it. The Qataris, although very small, are, have become a force to reckon with in the last 30 years. So this is the dynamic here. Now, to respond to your question about the overall dynamics in the Middle East. So who are the major powers? The major powers in the Middle East are certainly the Israelis, and who, in addition to the economic competition and the ideological differences or the threats that Qatar's diplomacy might pose to Saudi hegemony, the Saudis only view the Iranians as the greatest threat for them. So in the last several years, especially after the Islamic Revolution, they had been very concerned about Iran repeating in Saudi or in the neighborhood. And because of the fundamental ideological divide between the Shias and the Sunnis, they have looked upon with Iran with a lot of disfavor. It is only in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, with the Chinese, they mended fences. With the help of the Chinese, they mended fences with the Iranians. But the Iranians, New York Times report day before yesterday said that the current Prince Salman has asked the Americans to continue pummeling the Iranians and not to give them a reprieve, because this is the moment to finish them off completely. This is his uncle Abdullah's stance too, who's no more. His uncle Abdullah is famously quoted as saying, "Cut off the serpent's head."
Yeah.
So this is the dynamic. Now the Saudis have been in a relationship with the Israelis for some time. Probably 10, 15 years as far as I know, maybe even before. They together view the Iranians as a bit of a common threat. The Saudis are really worried about Iran becoming a nuclear power. So this is the dynamic, and this is where the Americans come in. So this is where we are. At the moment, I think when this war is over, we will end up in a situation where the Israelis will appear stronger. We don't know, only time can tell if they will really be strong. A very weakened Iran at one level, and the Gulf countries rethinking their strategy about Hormuz, because that is, any day the Iranians can choke the straits for traffic. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Now, as we speak, recent tensions across West Asia have raised concerns about the risk of wider escalation. From the structural perspective, how close is the region today to a broader regional conflict? What do you think?
I think a broader regional conflict is highly unlikely. I'll tell you why. Because it'll be very awkward for the Gulf states to wage a war against Iran. Already, Ali Larijani, who was killed 2 days ago, he said, think for a moment. Are you going to be against us and join the Israelis? So it's an awkward choice for the Gulf countries. They don't like either of, they're not the greatest friends. Thanks to the Abraham Accords, the Emiratis have established diplomatic relations with the Israelis. The Bahrainis have established diplomatic relations. Morocco and then Sudan. And Azerbaijan, I think, or Kazakhstan, I think. One of those two countries also came aboard last year, 2025. But generally, Israel is still considered a bit of an untouchable by these countries. They can tolerate them to be able to flaunt a relationship with the Israelis and to join a war where Israel is the principal antagonist will look a little odd. So that is why you see, after 3 weeks of attacks in the Gulf, the Gulf countries have issued a statement. They post different messages on their leaders post messages. They think it is unfair, but they haven't reacted really.
Do you think today's conflicts, isolated crises, are a part of a larger regional competition?
I'm not so sure that it is part of a larger regional competition. It is a question of security in my mind. It's simply the Iranians have pursued security deterrence. They want strategic deterrence, and then for that they've gone after the nuclear device. The Israelis don't like it because this is called the security-insecurity paradox. So I do something that increases your anxiety. So in return, you do something which then heightens my insecurity. And so the cycle keeps escalating. So they have been driven to this after 79, when the Israelis were considered, along with the Americans, as the enemy. Then there was, and of course the Sunni Islamic world, also the traditional enemy. The doctrine of the Iranians was to become the leader of the Shia world and to rise to the Israeli challenge, because the Saudis were not doing it, the others were not doing it, they were all in the American camp. So when they began this program, Now, there had been three instances where the Israelis have struck. They struck when in the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein went after a nuclear program. They conducted a preemptive strike and finished that idea. In the early 2000s, they did the same with Syria. And Syria was developing or was going after a nuclear device with North Korean help, North Korean assistance. Libya's Gaddafi, Colonel Gaddafi, had this ambition, but he was talked out of it. So there were economic sanctions and so on and so forth, and they were then removed by the Western community, and I think he gave up. So there were three other places. This motivated the Iranians to take it underground. They knew that the Israelis, because the Syrian attack, I think, was in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. So they became very careful, and they dug underground for a mile deep into the ground, where you can't be really, you needed the Americans to do the work. And that's what happened last year. So I think it is not a question of supremacy. It's a question of survival when it comes to these two countries, Israel and Iran. And for the Saudis, they're afraid of two things. One is an Islamic style revolution that happened in Iran, replicating itself in Saudi Arabia or in the neighborhood. The second is the fundamental divide, the Shia-Sunni divide, and for them not to lose that leadership position, albeit briefly, to the Iranians. So I think it's driven more by security than by, I would think, regional influence.
To what extent do you think does the deterrence stabilize the region? And to what extent might it simply postpone the conflict?
Deterrence is a double-edged sword. The more you try to build deterrence, the more you invite, as we just discussed, a bit of anxiety on the other end. So this becomes cyclical, and it keeps ratcheting up. So the best is to get into an arrangement where you have a negotiated arrangement where you build trust and reach a place where both of us can coexist peaceably. Now that will require a lot of maturity, a lot of trust building. That had happened between the French and the English. They had fought so many wars, but they were able to come together. The Germans and the other Europeans, after the two world wars, they could come together. The Vietnamese, after all that the American invasion and the bombing did, are able to look upon Americans as friends. The Japanese, of all the people, after being hit by a nuclear bomb in two places and in more than 100,000 people having been killed by the Americans, see the Americans as one of their closest friends and allies. So if all this is possible, I think it is also possible here in the Middle East. It's possible in South Asia. It might take a longer bit of time. And one should understand that we have to coexist because this is the only planet that we have. Once we realize that, and that should dawn to these leaders.
I wish this happens sooner.
Completely.
Do you think proxy conflicts become the primary way regional powers compete today?
Very good question. If you look at the last 30, 40 years of the Middle East conflict, or even South Asia, I would even leave Middle East. Let's first discuss the Middle East, and then we'll come to South Asia. If you look at the Middle East, West Asia, as the Indians call the place, there are several proxies. You have the Houthis in Yemen, who are the proxies of the Iranians. You have the Hezbollah, which is another Shia outfit, like the Houthis, who again are the clientele of the Iranians. You have Hamas in Palestine. They are Sunnis, but because they are mounting a resistance to the Israelis, the Iranians are bankrolling them, giving them arms and support, etc. Then there are other lesser known outfits that we don't know very much about.
Kurds?
Kurds are opposed to the Iranians. they live across 4 states. They live across Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. And they've not been able to get a place for themselves. The majority of them live in Turkey. I think 12 million of them live in Turkey. Until Turkey wanted to be part of the European Union, even their linguistic rights were a bit of a problem. And when Turkey wanted to be part of this larger European community, then they relaxed and they were allowed to use their Kurdish language. Otherwise, the process of Turkification is absolute and complete. It turns everybody into a Turk, primarily. That was after Ataturk, Kemal Pasha, came to power. The process of Turkification was very, very complete. So proxy wars you've seen what the proxy wars have done, and Houthis, in Yemen, the proxy war is still continuing. The less intensity conflict is what you see in Palestine today. The Hamas has not come on board. So the Israelis have 2 fronts. They have a Hezbollah front in Lebanon. They have a front in Iran, and then they've been bombing indiscriminately because they have a number of other targets, and they are scrambling for targets. And you see, they are very good at their intelligence, but they don't have all the intelligence. For instance, the 400 plus kilogram enriched uranium. It's believed that it is in Isfahan. Some others say some of it could be there, some of it could be close to Natanz. And the Iranians must have prepared themselves for this day. So they must have a number of decoy canisters. So if you're going to go after the canister that holds this uranium 235 enriched material, there could be a number of decoys and thousands perhaps. So you'll be on a wild goose chase. So that could be one of those. And the missiles, the ballistic missiles, some of it or quite a bit of it has been degraded, has been destroyed according to the Americans and according to the Americans. If that is a military goal, if it's a military objective, they have achieved some of it. Now, going back to your question as to proxy wars, etc., let's go to South Asia. The major difficulty that the Indians had with the current Prime Minister of Bangladesh was because he was supposedly in favor of arming and hosting the anti-Indian rebels in the Northeast. And in that, the Indians had said very difficult things in 2004 against him, if you go back and look at it. So the Bangladeshis wanted to do that to India. And there is also this allegation, this accusation that the Indians are helping the Baloch insurgency. So we don't know. We are far removed from these places. We don't have the kind of intelligence. You and I are not military experts. We are not in the intelligence. We are not part of the intelligence community. So we don't know. The Indians argue that the Pakistanis help proxy groups in Kashmir. And the Pakistanis accuse us of helping the Baloch. So proxy war is actually lesser pain, and it's tiring the enemy and bleeding the enemy using somebody else, and of course you have to support this, and in the end it comes to bite you. So that's where we are.
From what's happening today, if we analyze from Tehran's perspective, what security concerns and strategic objectives shape its behavior in the region today?
Tehran, Tehran once, in 79, I'm not so sure that they really wanted this nuclear device. I think we spoke in our last session about the Atoms for Peace program. So the Americans were the ones who introduced this program to the Iranians. So that was for peaceful purposes. In 79, when Ayatollah Khomeini staged the Islamic Revolution, I think his idea was to just export the revolution to the rest of the Islamic world, which was contained, which didn't happen. When this deceased Khamenei took over 10 years after Khomeini, he issued a fatwa, an edict saying that we will not, even Khomeini was against a nuclear device. But then over a period of time, they understood that this was the only thing that will grant them absolute security. If they had this nuclear device today, you think the Americans would have attacked them? They would be like Kim Jong-il, right? With a 90, what was the percentage of the voters who elected him?
99.93.
Correct, something like that. So they would be in a happy place like Kim Jong-il. So that is what they were after despite. And it was only in 2002, one of the opposition groups revealed the fact that these people were after a nuclear device. And then the IAEA got in, and then the West got in, and then there were talks, etc. In 2005, the American intelligence community, in 2005, I think, or 2007, said they were not after the bomb. They had paused that project. But they had the industrial, the technological, and the science, the capabilities that these things could give them were there in store. And at any given point in time, they might turn to this project again. So that is why the Obama administration then, when he took over, got into talks, and after 20 months of talks, the Obama agreement, where the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, America, Britain, France, Russia, and China, plus Germany, signed a deal with these people, because some of these people, the French and the others, have already, before the Islamic Revolution, were engaged in building nuclear facilities like Kudangulam for their energy needs.
Is the Middle East still shaped primarily by external great powers, or are the regional actors increasingly determine outcomes? What do you think?
I think the latter. I think Israel, the fact that Israel is over there, if the Middle East was, if you imagine the Middle East, a Middle East sans Israel, or a Middle East without Israel, they probably could be a little less strife. The Israelis, the first Arab state to get into a diplomatic relationship with the Israelis, were the Egyptians in 1980. After that, it took 14 years for the next Arab state to embark on this journey, which was Jordan. So the Israelis have always felt that they've been extremely isolated. They fought 3 wars. The first war in 40, 48, 49, the second in 67, and the third in 73. Some of these Arab states came together to fight the Israelis. So the Syrians joined, the Iraqis joined, the Egyptians led, the Jordanians joined. So for them, they had to really preserve themselves. So they had finally gone back to the ancestral land 2,000 years later. They had to hold on to it. They had to secure it. So they were always on high alert. So the conscription was mandatory. Everybody was conscripted. And in 1973, if not for American help, they may have lost. So they came out of it. And that won them a renewed sense of admiration from the American side, after which the Americans became very, very close to the Israelis. Although the strategic interests of the Americans were business, strategic, and political interests were equally aligned with the Saudis. You would see the American presidents very differential to the royal family. You can see some of those videos and photographs. So the Saudis had a very special place. So a Middle East without Israel may have been a bit less hostile. But still, I wouldn't rule out regional competition between the Egyptians and the Saudis and the Emiratis, as we see now, the Qataris and the Saudis for some time, as we saw. So that is human nature. So that will always continue despite the Gulf Cooperation Council, despite the larger Islamic civilization, despite Islamic Brotherhood that everybody professes. There will be regional competition. There will be, I definitely want to be better than you, and then so on and so forth. But the Israelis, the presence of Israel there, I think have, greatly ignited the place. It has kept the place as a tinderbox, about to catch fire any time. Am I saying that Israel shouldn't be there? No. I'm saying that if at the creation of Israel, an agreed solution, the two-state solution had happened, I think things would have been much less, much more calm than now.
So, in a way, we can say that Israelis are keeping the Middle East countries together, united. If weren't the Israelis, they could have...
To some extent, but not to a great extent, because now, much more than security, it's become, in the last 30, 35 years, the Islamic world had to confront what it considers as a radical streak of Islam. So, the Israelis are past masters at this game. They are exponents when it comes to counterinsurgency and so on. And then they've excelled in the field of science and technology. So there's so much that the Arab states could learn from the Israelis. So there is, and of course, America will be pleased if you establish relations with the Israelis. The Abraham Accords, the Egyptian diplomatic recognition, and then the Jordanian diplomatic recognition, both happened under, the latter happened under Clinton, and the first happened under Jimmy Carter. So the Americans have been the driving force. So if you befriend the Israelis, the Americans will be pleased. That's the general logic. So if you are friends of the Americans, of course you want to please them to some extent. So this dynamic has changed in the last, I would think, in the last couple of decades after the advent of radical Islam. Because for the monarchies and then for the Islamic world, the modest, moderate Islamic world, Islamic radicalism is an equally strong threat. And in that, they have selectively cooperated with the Israelis.
Some analysts argue that American security guarantees have stabilized the Middle East. Others argue that external involvement has prolonged the instability. Which interpretation better explains, according to you, the region today?
Look at the military alliances that we have. NATO is a military alliance. Then we don't have any such alliances here in South Asia. We have two nuclear powers which are inimical to each other, hostile, and are at loggerheads. What happens? What prevents them from going into a major full-blown war is the fact that both of them are nuclear powers. So the ability to strike you with a nuclear device keeps you in check. But then that hasn't prevented both these countries from, going at each other's throats. There have been many skirmishes. Last year we had a 4-day hostility between the two countries. Go back to NATO, and we don't have a military alliance here. We had SEATO and CENTO in the 50s and 60s. The Indians have traditionally refused to be part of any military alliance. Okay, but that hasn't helped really. So let's wait for a moment here, and then we go to Europe. NATO, if you listen to President Putin, he says, NATO was at my doorstep. I warned you. I asked you not to extend, and you've been constantly extending, and then you've come all the way up to almost my doorstep. And I can't tolerate this anymore because this is my sphere of influence, and I need to push back. That explains, from his vision, the conflict with Ukraine. There is a huge military alliance, NATO. Now, Ukraine is not part of NATO. Under the Three Musketeers rule of NATO, Article 5, an attack on one of the NATO states, the 27 NATO states, is an attack of everyone, is an attack against everybody else. So everybody should rush to the defense of the attacked state. Thankfully, Ukraine is not one of those. So they are indirectly channeling help. So there's a military configuration there. There is a military alliance there. Still, there is turbulence, and still that military alliance has actually created the turbulence if you were to buy President Putin's version or justification for conducting that war. You go to the Middle East. Middle East, there's a security umbrella that the Americans grant, which is an extension of what the British did before the Second World War, because they were the tallest power then, until then. When the Americans came aboard, the British oil companies, where some of them were replaced by American oil interests, and American political influence replaced British political influence. British security guarantees were replaced by American security guarantees. But unlike the Pakistani-Saudi pact, which happened a little earlier, recently, where one would come to the mutual defense of the other, there is, I'm not so sure that there is a concrete framework where there is a military alliance. There's a tacit relationship. These have been traditional allies of the Americans, and the Americans have traditionally guaranteed their security. And we saw that happen in 1990 when Saddam Hussein walked into Kuwait and gobbled it up. The Americans came to the defense of the Kuwaitis, and if not for the Americans, the Kuwaitis would not continue as a sovereign nation today.
True.
So I am not so sure what is the best way to have a sense of equilibrium in a trouble spot such as the Middle East. It is simply a common future, a common economic strides and progress, putting aside beliefs and differences and the past. And I think we are entering into a phase where you see in this war, you see a lot of AI, you see a lot of gadgetry, you see a lot of machines fighting. Thankfully, very few individuals are involved, very few human bodies are physically involved. So this is a war which is, where science plays and technology plays a very important role. Similarly, I think in the future, the difficulties that this human beings would have in this planet is to preserve this planet, to preserve the environment, to find enough water for our needs, to keep the air clean. Those are the difficulties, and not you as my enemy and I as your enemy. We have a common foe, and that common foe is that this planet is not as green as it was once. It is not as resourceful at the rate of which we consume as before. And so that is the larger combat, that is the larger fight. And in that, we need to work together as humanity. So this is all a distraction now. Maybe I'm speaking about several decades ahead, but that is where we are. We already have unmanned aircraft, we already have drones, we already have interceptors and missiles, we already have unmanned taxis. So we are going into an extremely scientific world where I think our differences, the differences amongst between humans and humanity, there is no room for it.
How vulnerable are global energy routes such as the Strait of Hormuz during regional tensions?
Oh, it's very vulnerable, as you can. Okay, only a fifth of the world's oil passes through the Hormuz Strait, but it seems to have really hurt President Trump. 3 days ago, he called for his European allies and NATO member states to come to his aid, to send warships to keep the strait open. He asked 6 nations, in particular Japan, South Korea. None of them agreed. None of them agreed. It is no surprise. So he's so cut up with them that he said, "We have been there for you. You turned your back, and we can do it ourselves." I think that is another place where he probably miscalculated the resolve of the Iranians, because originally I thought that if the Iranians were to completely shut it off, it'll also hurt them. And I've seen studies which say that it will also impede their export capacity of oil. But I think they've found a modus vivendi where their oil continues to flow to China. And they've, in fact, exported much more after the start of the war
Yes.
than before. So it's only enemy ships or ships originating from enemy territory, enemy countries, which will not be allowed passage or which will come under harm's way. So the Indians have managed to negotiate. 4 times our foreign minister had spoken to his counterpart, Abbas Araghchi, and then in those, as a result of those conversations, we have been able to, bring out 2 ships which were stuck there. There was a small crisis for us. I would even say a major crisis for about 2 days about LPG.
Yes.
And then there were big queues in fuel stations and in gas stations. So all that has come to, we Indians have relaxed a bit. So yes, it could, as we see from this war, it could be a problem. And when the Egyptians nationalized Suez in the 1950s, Suez Canal, that led to a war in 1956. The British and the French, along with the Israelis, started attacking the Egyptians. And it was then the Americans who got involved and stopped the war, asked the British and the French and the Israelis to back off. So history is quite paradoxical. I mean, the Americans that we now know, we think of Trump's America as this very combat hungry, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba. There seems to be so much appetite for these confrontations in the Trump administration, the second Trump administration. But there have been times when the Americans have been more reasonable and more pragmatic.
Now that you touched the Suez Canal, don't you think the history is repeating in Hormuz?
Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the Egyptians nationalized it. But the Suez Canal remains open, and the difficulty was overcome after the Egyptians. I don't think they closed it for even after the French and the British attacked them. Once peace was restored, Suez Canal is open for passage. It has been open for passage for a long time. Whereas here, the Iranians can close it at will. They can attack with their small boats. They don't have, or they can lay mines, and sea mines could choke the place. And it's a costly endeavor to keep the place open. So this war will make the Gulf states to rethink how to avoid Hormuz. The Indians used to bring 45% of their oil needs through Hormuz. Now they only bring 30%. It might go down further. So every other country will be thinking about alternate routes. So to go through the Cape of Good Hope and to do this, it will be an extra 9,000 kilometers. So the Hormuz, although only a fifth of the traffic passes through the Hormuz, is an important artery.
Do you think domestic economic pressures influence geopolitical decisions in the region?
We'll know in a couple of weeks as the gas prices go up, because they used to be around $3.65 a gallon. Now I think they are hovering around $5 in the US. So there's been a 30 more than
Across 6, I believe.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so there's been more than a 35-40% raise. And Americans are essentially, there are as many cars as there are Americans on earth. So it's their principal mode of transport. And so they are heavily dependent on this oil prices being steady. And because if the oil prices were to increase, then freight charges will increase, transportation costs will increase. That will increase prices, reflect in the prices, and then that will lead to inflation. So it's a vicious cycle. So at least President Trump had told us that this is just a short, it's not a long-term pain. Afterwards the prices will go down. to where they were. For that to happen, he has to, stop this war as quickly as possible and probably go back to the negotiating table.
Despite repeated diplomatic initiatives, tensions remain in the region. What structural factors limit the effectiveness of this diplomacy?
Because there's no trust. There's been a history of rancor. The trust building that has happened in Europe, in Western Europe, is yet to reach our shores in South Asia or in the Middle East. These are people with elephantine memories. So they have to get past their history because geography has united them. If history has divided them, they are united by geography. You're my neighbor, I'll have to live with you, whether I like it or not. The same with South Asians. So the Western Europeans have figured this out. They have fought so many wars. They've fought 2 world wars.
True.
And they have come together. So if they can do it, we should take a page from their book. That's what it is.
True. How important is the information and narrative environment in shaping modern conflicts in the region?
I think it's very, very important. You have to set the narrative, and then the right information has to go out. It's as important as fighting a battle on a day-to-day basis in the battlefield. So Hitler's minister for information, Goebbels, in fact, he was considered the minister for disinformation because he put out stories that were completely different from the ground reality. So you see the president of the United States talking to the press and taking to the media on a daily basis. His Truth Social posts is his way of communicating, is his way of saying that we are the most powerful nation on earth, we are the most powerful army on earth, and then we have decimated the Navy, the Iranian Navy, we have decimated the Iranian Air Force, we have wiped away their aerial defenses, and so on. And so throughout it's a lot of rhetoric coming from there, and some of it, or quite a bit of it, must be true. And the good thing is, the Americans, especially this president, has this propensity to tell us a lot. But yesterday, when I think he also gets a bit ruffled because the Europeans let him down. They didn't join the Hormuz his call to keep the Hormuz Strait open. And I'm sure that there are difficulties that you and I don't know about. So information is very key to set the narrative, especially in a war of this kind, where we have no access. Independent media and independent sources have really no access to be in the field and report mostly. So therefore, information coming from both sides is what we need to evaluate and see how much of that is credible and how much of that is hyperbole or rhetoric. So information is very, very key.
If we look ahead over the next decade, what key indicators do you think should observers watch to understand whether the Middle East is moving toward a more stable balance of power or toward recurring cycles of instability?
We should firstly, we should not have these kind of conflicts. There should be a negotiated arrangement and settlement on some of these more contentious issues. The Palestinian issue should be resolved once and for all. That, I think, will mostly settle most of the disputes in the Middle East between the Islamic world and Israel. Once that is resolved, which is going to be a very, very difficult thing, because people have tried, American presidents have tried, many American presidents have tried. Clinton came very, very close, but he couldn't do it. So if that is resolved, if there is continuous engagement and dialogue on that front, probably sponsored or brokered by the Americans, and this administration can do that, actually can push for the two-state solution as much as he is completely in bed with the Israelis. this president can do that. And if that were to happen, if the ball were to roll on that front, that will bring an element of stability to the Middle East. There will always be regional tensions and regional rivalries. There will be, even between siblings there is rivalry. So that will continue to happen. That is the nature of the world. That is the nature of the cosmos. But beyond that, as we spoke earlier, there's a common future. You're united. You didn't choose this geography. So you are there. And so you have to make the best of it. So I think the Palestinian issue is probably the most fundamental to put many of these conflicts to rest. So we should restart negotiations on that front. With Netanyahu there, it's not going to happen. With an emboldened and more powerful Israel after this conflict, if Israel were to emerge more powerful, it's going to be even more difficult. But at some point in time, somebody has to do this. And then once that, there is negotiations, there is talks, these two parties are meeting each other, they've come to the table, I think that will lessen much of the anxiety that you see in the Middle East. Then there are other traditional rivalries, etc., that over a period of time will be resolved in this hugely challenging world that we are about to enter.
Is that going to be an easy task? Because now I see the Iranians bombarding their neighbors, Arab world, are saying that they want to they're eating the American bases. Unfortunately, they're bombarding the civilians.
The president had apologized to them, and I think there will be some bitterness after this war between the Gulf states and Iran, because the Gulf states aren't in support of this war, at least not, openly. There are reports where we see Mohammed bin Salman saying that the Americans should be relentless and continue this attack against the Iranians until they are completely degraded, etc. We don't know how true this is, but part of it could be true. But openly, the Gulf states have exercised maximum restraint. They have held back. And this has been going on for almost 3 weeks now. And then still they have exercised utmost restraint and discipline. And so I think there will be some bitterness, but over a period of time that will be overcome. If the Kuwaitis and the Iraqis, after the invasion of the Iraqis into Kuwait under Saddam Hussein, can work it out, can be friends and neighbors, I think this can happen too.
How should we understand India's role in the Middle East today, particularly in relation to energy security, trade, and diplomatic relations with countries across the region?
India is in a very, very difficult place. We are trying to be friends with everyone in the region. We are friends with the Iranians, although we stopped buying oil in 2019 from them. The Iranians have shown much understanding to us. We took 5 days to condole Ayatollah Khamenei's assassination, death. We have been very, we haven't spoken against this war effort by the Americans and the Israelis. In fact, just before the war, a couple of days before the war began, February 26th, if I'm right, our Prime Minister was in Israel. So we are trying to befriend everybody, keep everybody as friends. Some are more closer to us than the rest, but it's a very difficult, it's a tall order on the part of this particular government. So we have so far managed well, although the government has come under extreme criticism from the opposition, that we have taken a pro-American line. We have kowtowed to American President Trump. So one of the criticisms is that he had mentioned that he was instrumental in brokering a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And India said this over more than 90 times. And we haven't really flatly, categorically rejected or pushed back. We've been very diplomatic. No third world leader had asked us to stop this war is the most that our Prime Minister could say. Jaishankar said, we decide our own foreign policy, etc. We have handled everybody with a pair of soft gloves. It's a very difficult period for me, a period for the Indians. But we seem to have come out pretty much unscathed. The fact that the Iranians were willing to release these two ships for further passage to India. We agreed to give all the three ships which had come here for a naval exercise and which had started to leave. And on their way, one of them was sunk in the Indian Ocean. We didn't condemn it because the Indian Ocean is considered our sphere of influence, at least the ocean next to India. But this happened close to the Sri Lankan shores, 40 kilometers or miles away from the Sri Lankan shores. And the Sri Lankans didn't condemn it. They are in such an awkward position. So the request to dock these ships came on the day the war began, on the 28th of February. On the 1st of March, we agreed to take those ships back. On their way back to India, only one managed to come, and it is docked in Cochin. The other was torpedoed, and more than 80 sailors were killed. The third one has now docked in Sri Lanka. So we are walking a very fine line between the Americans, not to antagonize the Americans, at the same time not to displease the Iranians, and be friends with everybody. It's a difficult period for all South Asian countries. India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. The Pakistani Prime Minister went over to Riyadh because they have a defense pact. After the Iranian attacks, continued, he went over to Riyadh to meet with the Saudi royal family, and he returned. We don't know what transpired there, but they're bound by a mutual defense agreement. It is in everybody's interest that this war comes to a conclusion very soon. As far as energy, the government has been under extreme scrutiny. So how are we going to overcome this LPG crisis? Do we have enough stocks, etc.? It's a moment for us to reflect. We don't have the habit of storing or stockpiling gas cylinders or even liquefied petroleum gas. We have only two facilities, underground facilities, where we can store the gas as it is without putting them into bottles. And they can only take 2 days of supply. So this is for us a wake-up call for us to think about in the future if this were to happen, because there are more households that now use liquefied petroleum gas. In 2017, there were only about 20 plus crore households. Today we have 33 crore households. In a spate of 9 years, for every 2 users, there's been an additional 1 household that has come online. So therefore, this has helped us to reevaluate our strategy, because we store oil, we store petrol. We have 2 months of reserves to meet a contingency. Also, we have our dependency on Hormuz has been lessened from 45% to 30%, according to our oil minister, petroleum minister. This war, I think we have done a very fine tightrope walking, despite what the opposition says. It's very difficult to be in those shoes, to be in a government and to be friendly with everybody.
True. Thank you, sir. It was wonderful having you once again with us at the final mandate. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mahendra. It's been my pleasure.